In the summer of 859, a line of ships appeared off the Moroccan coast that should not have existed. Long ships with carved dragon heads, sails striped in foreign colors, cutting through water that belonged to an entirely different world. Muslim watchtower guards froze, unable to reconcile what their eyes reported. These were Northmen, Vikings, warriors from cold fjords thousands of miles away. They had no place here in the warm Mediterranean, off the shores of an Islamic emirate that had never faced a northern raid. Yet there they were. And by sunset they would rewrite the strategic map of the Mediterranean forever. In the middle of the 9th century, the Mediterranean Sea belonged to the Islamic world in ways that seemed permanent and unquestionable. From the Straits of Gibraltar to the coasts of Syria, Muslim fleets dominated the waters with confidence built on centuries of naval superiority. For any merchant or coastal dweller in 859, the idea that a non-Muslim force could project serious naval power into the heart of the Mediterranean seemed not just unlikely but absurd. The Emirate of Necker sat on the northern coast of Morocco, nestled where green valleys met the sea. It was prosperous, controlling fertile agricultural land and trade routes connecting the interior of Africa to Mediterranean ports. Its markets sold grain, textiles, olive oil, and slaves. The ruling family traced its lineage back to the Prophet Muhammad himself. But Necker had one fatal weakness: it had no serious navy. The Emirates' defenses focused entirely on land-based threats: Berber tribes, rival dynasties, bandits. Their fortifications were designed to resist siege engines and cavalry assaults, not amphibious landings by seaborne raiders who could appear without warning. This wasn't carelessness, it was logic. No northern power had ever launched a sustained naval campaign into the southern Mediterranean. The distance was too great. The logistics were impossible. Viking raids had plagued the Atlantic coasts of Europe, yes, but they did not cross into the Mediterranean. The Straits of Gibraltar formed a natural barrier where currents ran strong and Muslim fleets patrolled regularly. Any Viking force attempting to enter would have to navigate those straits under the eyes of Cordoba's navy, then operate thousands of miles from home in hostile waters. It made no sense. It defied every reasonable assessment of risk and reward. The Vikings who appeared off Necker's coast had not arrived by accident. They had come through careful planning, extraordinary seamanship, and a willingness to take risks that other naval powers considered suicidal. Two commanders led the fleet: Hastian, a veteran raider whose name already carried weight across the Frankish kingdoms, and Bjorn Ironside, a warrior whose lineage connected him to the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. Together they had assembled 62 longships and recruited thousands of men for a campaign that promised wealth beyond anything the raided-out coasts of northern Europe could offer. By 859, the Viking world faced a strategic problem. For decades, Norse raiders had extracted enormous wealth from Britain, Ireland, and Francia. But success had brought diminishing returns. Coastal settlements had learned to build defenses. The element of surprise had eroded through repetition. Hastian and Bjorn chose a different path. They would go where no Viking fleet had gone before. The Mediterranean represented everything the northern world was not: warmth, wealth concentrated in undefended coastal cities, trade routes thick with merchant vessels, and shores that had never seen a Viking longship. The expedition's first challenge was reaching the Mediterranean at all. Rather than attempting a direct crossing through the Straits of Gibraltar, Hastian first struck targets along the Iberian coast, testing Muslim defenses and gathering intelligence about patrol patterns. What they learned was that Muslim naval power, while dominant, was not omnipresent. Patrol routes followed predictable patterns. Gaps existed. Under cover of darkness and favorable winds, the fleet passed through the straits, not all at once, but in smaller groups spread across several nights. By the time Cordoba's coastal watchers realized a major northern fleet had entered the Mediterranean, the longships were already dispersed, moving east along the African coast. The Vikings struck the Balearic Islands first, testing how quickly Muslim forces could respond and creating confusion about the fleet's true destination. Muslim authorities issued warnings, but tracking 62 longships that could move independently and beach on remote shores proved nearly impossible. Hastian had chosen his target carefully. Necker was wealthy enough to make the raid profitable, but not so heavily defended that it would require a prolonged siege. Its defenses were oriented toward land threats, not seaborne assault. And sacking an Islamic emirate on African soil would send a message that would echo across the entire Mediterranean world. As the fleet approached, Necker's watchtowers finally spotted them. Dozens of ships moving with disciplined coordination. Messengers rode hard toward the capital, carrying news that should have been impossible. The emir called his council. They debated options with frantic energy, negotiations, mobilization, requests for help. The debate consumed hours. The Vikings consumed the distance to shore in a single night. By dawn, Hastion's fleet was beaching on the sand with confident aggression. The longships hit the beach in waves. Warriors poured over the sides, forming shield walls with practiced efficiency. The sound carried across the water, the rhythmic thunder of oars being shipped, the scrape of keels on sand, the shouts of commanders in a language Neckar's defenders had never heard spoken by an enemy. Neckar's coastal garrison numbered a few hundred men. They had prepared for pirates or small raiding parties, not for an army of 3,000 warriors. The assault began with methodical violence. The first groups formed shield walls immediately, creating defensive positions. Archers provided covering fire. The Vikings advanced with the efficiency of men who had done this dozens of times across a dozen different coastlines. What shattered Neckar's resistance was not just the numbers, it was the alien nature of the threat itself. The city soldiers had never faced shield walls that moved like single organisms, never encountered the particular ferocity of Norse warriors fighting with axes designed to shatter shields. The first defensive line broke within an hour. Survivors fell back toward the city's outer walls. The Vikings reached the gates and brought tools they had carried specifically for this purpose: axes, hammers, and a small battering ram. Teams of warriors attacked the gates in rotation, the relentless thunder of metal on wood echoing through the city. Defenders poured arrows down, dropped stones, tried to pour heated oil. Some Vikings fell. But the assault continued without pause, and the gates that had never been breached finally gave way in a cascade of shattered timber. The Vikings poured through. Street fighting became a nightmare of close-quarters chaos. Norse warriors operated in groups of 10 to 20 men, using their shields to create mobile walls while their axes cleared resistance with brutal efficiency. Neckar's defenders fought building by building. Some barricaded themselves in mosques. Others attempted ambushes from rooftops. None of it mattered strategically. The Vikings had numerical superiority, tactical experience, and momentum. By midday, Viking forces had reached the palace. The emir's personal guard made their stand on the palace steps, professional soldiers determined to sell their lives expensively. Hastion himself led the assault. The fighting was hand-to-hand, vicious, and brief. They found the emir in his private chambers, surrounded by family and advisors with nowhere left to retreat. The Vikings did not kill him. Dead emirs could not pay ransoms. With the palace secured and the emir captive, organized resistance collapsed. What followed was not combat, but extraction. The Vikings moved through the city with systematic efficiency, targeting where wealth concentrated. The palace treasury was emptied first: gold, silver, jewelry. Then the markets. Then the mosques, where religious endowments had accumulated over decades. Then the homes of wealthy families. Captives were selected with equal calculation. The emir and his family were the most valuable prizes. But the Vikings also took merchants, craftsmen, and young people who could be sold as slaves. By late afternoon, Hastion gave the order to withdraw. The Vikings pulled back in organized stages, then pushed their ships back into the water with coordinated discipline. The fleet that had appeared impossibly on Neckar's horizon began to pull away, their holds packed with treasure, their decks crowded with captives. Their reputation now expanded to include something no Muslim power had thought possible. When the last longship disappeared beyond the horizon, Neckar began counting what it had lost. The treasury was empty. The palace had been stripped. Markets stood shattered. And the emir himself was gone. Within days, ransom demands arrived. The prices were calculated to extract maximum wealth without making payment impossible. Neckar paid, not immediately, but within months the gold was assembled and delivered. The emir returned home diminished, his authority weakened, his city still recovering from trauma. But Neckar's suffering was only one ripple in a much larger wave. News of the raid traveled with shocking speed. Merchants carried the story from port to port. Religious scholars wrote letters describing the assault. Poets composed verses about the northern demons who had appeared from nowhere. In Córdoba, the Umayyad Caliphate received reports with anger and alarm. The Caliph ordered immediate expansion of coastal defenses and naval patrols. Resources were allocated to building new warships and establishing coordinated warning systems. Other Muslim powers responded similarly. Governors reinforced coastal defenses. Naval commanders received instructions to engage any Viking ships on sight. But these preparations could not erase the fundamental truth the raid had revealed. The Mediterranean was no longer the secure Islamic lake it had been for centuries. The Vikings themselves continued their campaign. Necker was only one target in a much larger expedition. Hastin and Bjorn led their fleet deeper into the Mediterranean, raiding along southern France and Italy. Some raids succeeded spectacularly. Others met prepared defenses. But each attack reinforced the message that Norse raiders had permanently expanded their operational range. The psychological impact extended beyond military circles. For ordinary Muslims living in coastal cities, the raid introduced a new kind of anxiety. Viking attacks had previously been associated with distant Christian Europe. Now that distance had collapsed. For Vikings, the raid proved their ships could go anywhere and their warriors could defeat anyone. For Muslims, it revealed a vulnerability that demanded immediate attention. For Christians, it offered hope that their northern neighbors might serve as an unintentional check on Islamic expansion. The strategic consequences played out over decades. Muslim naval investment increased significantly. Coastal cities began maintaining permanent naval capabilities. Intelligence networks improved. Yet the fundamental change was irreversible. The Mediterranean had been opened. For Necker itself, recovery was slow. The city rebuilt but never regained its former prominence. The raid had damaged not just buildings but confidence and prestige. Watchtowers along Necker's coast maintained vigilant watch for generations. The legend grew with retelling. Some accounts exaggerated Viking numbers, others claimed the attack lasted days. But beneath the exaggerations, the core truth remained undeniable. On a single day in 859, a fleet from the frozen north had appeared off an African coast where they had no right to be. They had shattered defenses, captured an emir, looted a prosperous city, and sailed away with minimal casualties. One raid. One morning. One moment when audacity proved stronger than assumptions, when seamanship and violence rewrote the strategic map of the Mediterranean. The Vikings had come. They had conquered. And they had left behind something far more lasting than the scars of battle. They had left a question that would echo through centuries. If Necker could fall, what city could truly claim to be safe?